the earth brings storms and fears. Men reckon what it did and meant. But trepidation of the spheres, no greater far its innocence. Dull sublunary lovers love, whose soulless sense cannot admit of absence, cause it doth remove the thing which elemented it. But we by a love so much refined, that ourselves know not what it is, enter assured of the mind, careless eyes, lips, and hands to miss. Our two souls therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet, a breach but an expansion, like gold to air we fittingly speak. If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show, to move but doth if the other do. And though it in the center sit, yet when the other far doth roam, it leans and hearkens after it, and grows erect, that comes home. Such wilt thou be to me who must, like the other foot of length be run, thy firmness makes my circle just, and makes me end where I begun.
All right, thank you. I never know where to begin with something like this. I always like to start with the end. You know, you've read it, you've analyzed it. So what is the meaning of the poem? And we skip right to that, and then we can go back briefly and look at how he achieved that. That's essentially the question you have to answer with every poem that you would ever write about. What does it mean, and how did the author achieve that? And I read it again today in some material, that your ability to point out a metaphor or an apostrophe or a metonymy or any of that stuff is admirable, but it will get you almost no points with the readers if you cannot analyze those metaphors, those figures, and show how they contribute to the meaning as a whole. I think it's a lot simpler. I don't know how, if you think it's complicated, but in my mind it's simple. What does this piece of literature mean, and how did the author achieve it? And you've got all these tools that you've been learning about. I can pick any of those tools that apply here and show how he used this tool, this tool, this tool to achieve that meaning. So what is the meaning? What does he get it? It's essentially in the title, and the rest of the poem is just breaking that down and explaining it. Anybody want to go there? What does it mean? So I can call on somebody. Colleen, what do you think?
I can't find my copy.
I got one right here. You need a minute to think about it?
Yes.
The title, A Valediction, A Farewell Forbidding Warning. I mean, that tells you in a nutshell what the poem is about. Clayton, do you know? What would you say that title means?
Just like leaving and then saying like goodbye, giving warning, so like not allowing like sorrow or sadness or grief.
Yeah. So he doesn't want to make a show of it. He doesn't want to make a big show of this. They have to say goodbye. So where's he going? There are a couple of possibilities.
He's gonna die.
Say that again.
He's gonna die.
That's always, you got to consider that. It could be something less permanent than that. But let's say that's probably what he had in mind. Because the word mourning, we use that term lightly. We could say I was mourning the loss of my team. I was mourning the loss of summer. I have to go back to work or school. But literally it means you're mourning someone's death. So do you agree with that? Again, we're talking about big picture here. It's not the only way to say goodbye, but that's the way he wants to say goodbye. So what does that say about him and his wife, friend, girlfriend, well, whoever she is? What does that say that he doesn't, what kind of relationship did they have? And that's where we're now looking at how did the author achieve the meaning. That's kind of what he means. That's kind of what the poem is about, to leave without making a big deal about it. What's the value of that? Is there any virtue in that? Is there anything to be admired in that? To not make a big deal about anything, for that matter. In this case, about saying goodbye. Let me just slip off. MacArthur, you ever heard of General MacArthur? World War II general, you did? No? No one knows that name? MacArthur was a American hero in World War I, and then he was a major commander in the Pacific in World War II. He left the Philippines when the Japanese took over, and he said, "I shall return." And 3 years later, he did. The very same place. He made a deal to come back to the very spot that he left. He came back when the Americans invaded the Philippines. But in the Korean War, he was the commander in the Korean War until he was suggesting that we bomb China with maybe nuclear weapons, and they had to fire him. So he made this famous speech in which he said, the last words of the speech were, "Old soldiers never die, they just fade away." Ever heard of that? All right, well, that's sort of what he's saying here. You know, we're not going to die, we're just going to just softly leave.
Maybe he's not making a big deal out of it because their relationship, he's already lived it to the fullest. The love is so great that he doesn't have to make a big deal.
So let's look at that relationship. Courtney, how would you describe it? You heard what she said. Willa said, their love is so great, they don't have to make a big deal about it. How would you describe their relationship?
I think it's a very intimate one. If they are able to talk about this kind of thing and to view it in such a, not mature way, but like, it seems like this is something that he's definitely thought about. And I think it shows how their relationship is, that he's able to say, you know, I'm gonna die, but we've had this good relationship. We've had our whole thing, like Will was saying. And so when I die, I want you to be happy that we've had the time we've had, and happy that I'm, you know, I guess that I've had enough time to be able to be at this point while I'm alive and say, don't mourn me when I'm dead, I guess.
And this is where the metaphor comes in handy. He basically says, look at the last line number 8, or 7 and 8. For profanation of our joys to tell the laity of our love. So what's the opposite of laity? What is laity?
Like commonness?
What?
Commonness?
Yes, but in your church, and it's a religious term, if you're not ordained, you are a layperson, a layman, layperson, all right? If you're ordained, you are a clergyman. So he says, this will not tell the laity of our love, so that would suggest that their love is not common, and that it's almost holy. And so he doesn't want to, do you like public displays of affection? I can imagine some of you, like myself, would not like that. Maybe some of you are good with that. I know in the book of Song of Solomon, the girl who's speaking this time, says, "Your banner over me was love." You know that line? And that's a public display of affection to some degree. And not hugging and kissing in public, but there's in other words, there's that fine line. I'm proud of this person I'm with, my wife, my friend, my girlfriend. I'm proud of her. I'm not ashamed of her, like, I'm trying to keep her hidden. But at the same time, he's a guy that would not like public display of affection. You can imagine, I'm not real comfortable with that myself. That really doesn't make the other wrong, of course. That may be perfectly appropriate at times. But I guess this is something that I can relate to. So let's look at the 3 similes. And this would be the question number 4. There are 3 similes and a metaphor. The metaphor is the laity versus the clergy. So that kind of deepens their relationship. So we're a holy. Have you ever thought of loving someone as a holy thing? I don't think the world would possibly look at love that way. But I think that seems to be very appropriate, a very appropriate way to describe a love relationship. But look at the 3 similes. Sophia, can you give us, this is question number 4, can you give me one simile?
Yes, so it's of reach, but an expansion like gold to area than speed.
So that was, tell me where that is. I got that too.
It's in the sixth stanza
right, so would you read that little stanza?
Oh, the whole thing, yes. Our two souls therefore, which are one, though I must go, endure not yet a breach, but an expansion like gold to airy thinness deep.
So what is his rationale for saying, that we can part without mourning, we can part without making a big deal? And this is one of the reasons, because, well, explain it. What does he mean? When our two souls are one, so when I go, it's not a breach. What's a breach?
Invasion.
Well, it would be a place through which you could invade. What's a breach? A hole. It's a break. It's a void of something, a space. And he says, when I leave, there won't be a breach, but an expansion. So the opposite of a breach would be, fully connected, like gold to airy thinness deep. Now, what's the simile? Can you explain what he means there?
Yeah,
Like-
I mean, I just took it as like, even though they're gonna be separated, whether it's because of his death or because he's leaving, it's like their love is so great that they're not gonna be really torn apart. And so I guess it said, like gold to airy thinness deep. I didn't really talk about that part of this.
Well, see, that's the part, that's the image is where I'm trying to get you to see the idea. The abstract idea is our love's just gonna be better even though we're apart. But the image makes you see that. So you got gold. What would happen if you could take a mallet, now think of it literally, if you had gold, and beat any kind of metal, and particularly thin metal, what's gonna happen to that metal? You keep beating it. It's gonna get thinner and it's gonna spread out. So you beat something like that, it's going to, as it gets thinner, it's gonna get wider, correct? So how does that now kind of let us picture the fact that he says there's not gonna be a breach, but an expansion? How does that image now capture that idea of expansion? If you beat the goal, it's going to get wider. So there's an expansion. That's how our love is. You see that? That's why it's so important if you could get to the simile and not avoid it, not hurdle it, not hide from it, but try to dig into it. Wow, try to think practically. Your readers are going to be very impressed because I get the picture now. That's how. But he doesn't. One would not be appropriate. I mean, sufficient. So he has three. Yeah.
I'm likely just grasping at straws here, but the whole poem seems kind of like a biblical allusion to when Jesus was telling the disciples that he would die and that he would go away for a little while, but not to be sad because he'd be back and he'd be preparing a place for them.
Yeah, it's that same principle, of course. Good, thank you. Where's the other, Mason, what's the two more, simile? I got my eye on the clock, because I want you to start these other two in just a minute.
Well, there's one in the last,
We've done one.
there's one in the last stanza that says, such wilt thou be for thee who must like the other five.
And that's part of a broader simile, so that probably starts up there after the one Sophia. Why don't you start with that stanza, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Just read there to the end of the poem, it's just the next.
Started, if they be two?
Yeah.
If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two.
Okay, as they, and it's really important to kind of follow what are the pronouns. So they mean we are two souls. So they're two souls. My wife and I are married, we're pretty close. But we are not one person. I mean, we are two people. But metaphorically, we are one. Maybe, and I hope spiritually we are one. But we're still two people. It's like the Trinity. You know, they're still distinct persons, and yet they're one. That's the ultimate image of even what marriage is. Simply a picture of that. Because when we go to heaven, we're not going to be married. My wife doesn't like that, and that makes me feel really good. She's not only glad to have been married to me for 45 years up to this point, but she's willing to be married to me forever. And I've heard different ways to explain that. We will be together, but we won't be in the same way together, married together, because as the church, we're married to Christ. But you wanna marry somebody that's literally willing to be married to you for eternity. And I bet some people have said that about their marriage. It felt like an eternity, but I hope that won't be the case for you. That it will be something that, yeah, I can see this just going on forever. I mean, I'm pretty happy, pretty satisfied. So, you go back to that again, if you would. The two meaning the two souls.
If they be two, they are two so, as stiff twin compasses are two. Thy soul, the fixed foot, makes no show to move, but doth if the other do.
Okay, what's that picture? This is this long simile. What's the picture that he's trying to get at? We talked about a compass, right? What is that compass? Kieran, what's that compass he's referring to?
It's kind of like their love, so like when one goes away, it's still connected to the
But what's a
other.
compass?
It shows direction.
Well, it does, but this is also a compass, right? That thing, and one of them is metal and it sticks right here, and the other one, so she's the fixed point. And what do you used to draw circles with them, right? What else did you use them for? I mean, they're fun to draw circles with, but I'm sure they're really
Poke your friends.
poke people with it, of course. Well, in far as geometry, what was the point of it? I don't think I ever used one the way it was supposed to be used. Oh, you can, yeah, angles, that's right. What's that? Gotcha. All right, so keep going with that, Mason. She is the fixed foot. He is the pencil. And so, no, Kieran was the one who was explaining. How is that a picture of their relationship?
Well, they're both connected, so no matter like where he goes, he's still going to be connected to her, like she's like an anchor for him.
In fact, it says at the end, the ultimately, if he moves this way, but where's the other direction that he moves? Around who? Her. Because it says at the end, and also, I always, these are supposed to be symbolic, right? What is the ring symbolic of? A marriage, but what aspect of marriage? Yes, what else? What was in other words, what is a circle, an image, or a symbol for? Eternity, circle never, because, and he says that here, if he always ends where he began. So you see, that's the other, no matter how far away he gets, he never is too far. Of course, he's also going around her. She's the center of his universe. So all of that is part of that simile. That's his way of saying, that's why we don't have to be so sad, because we're really not leaving. What was the other simile? They said 3. I found one that didn't really seem like a simile to me. What? Well, we did the one about the gold, and we did the twin compass one.
And the other foot, right?
Well, that, I would say that's all, maybe that's it. But I was just thinking that was all one. But look at the very first line. As virtuous men pass mildly away and whisper and let their souls go, while some of their sad friends do say, now his breath goes, and some say no. So let us make no noise. That's a simile because it uses like or as, but what is this connection? What's he connecting his passing and his relationship to? Well, since I brought it up, I guess I should say it. As virtuous men pass mildly away. Instead of making a big deal about it, he's saying virtuous men, they die quietly. Let us do the same. And so, so we figured out those 3 things, and then he thinks he says his marriage, his relationship is holy. Look at the last one. What kind of language is used? Is the language consistent or consonant with the figures of speech? Maggie, what do you think? It's number 5. Okay. Sarah, what kind of language is used? And notice, before you answer, notice the questions they're asking him is the questions you cannot escape. The similes, the metaphors, the figures. What do they mean? What do they add to the poem? And now it's asking the language, the diction, the syntax. what is that adding to the poem? So, sorry to interrupt you, go ahead, tell us.
I said the language was kind of elevated and romantic, and I think it was constant throughout the poem because he used a lot of like metaphors and similes to get his point across, and the imagery.
So why is elevated, sophisticated, why is that appropriate for his point?
Well, he's talking about his love, and he starts by saying like he wants to be like virtuous men, so it kind of like all connects to his what he wants.
And so, can we go back and look at their relationship? How would you describe his relationship to this one? One of my favorite is, where does he say this? The fourth stanza, dull sublunary lovers love. What is sublunary? Under the moon, so earthly. Whose soul is sense, cannot admit of absence, because it doth remove the thing which elemented it. But our love is so refined that ourselves know not what it is. Inner assured of the mind, care less, lips, eyes, or eyes, lips, and hands to men. So what are the two kinds of loves that he's describing here? What if your love were only physical? That's the only reason you married somebody. I heard this guy, I hoped it was a joke, but I don't know, you hear passing TV or something. He said, it just comes a time with most people, they just get tired of the person. It's just they fall out of love. To me, that has to be a physical kind of thing. I mean, there's no spark anymore. Where's the spark? Because it was kind of all based, but he says, they're not like that. And I don't even have to be with the person I love in order to love you. He can be away from the person, because their relationship is not based on sense. It's based on, he doesn't say, but he says our love is so refined that ourselves know not what it is. And we don't have to be together. And I'll finish with this. There was a song, I think I understood it at the time, but I never forget. It was basically the song, 70s, 60s song. It says, if you can't, who was it? It always came to me. He said, but if you can't be with the one you love the one you're with. That's the opposite of this guy's attitude. This guy's attitude is, if you can't be with, because he's leaving. And if we together, there's no love. As long as you walk out that door, it's over. We have to be together, at least close enough to see each other a lot. Because if not, then I got to have somebody else. And so, if you can't be with the one you love, it's not his attitude, because he never leaves the one he loves. I don't know what your image is of marriage, or when that time comes. I'm wondering if there'll be marriage civilly someday. Now we've changed all the definitions and everything. Spiritually, there'll be, because that's still God's command. But this poem to me really expresses that kind of spirit. If there's not a spiritual angle to it, I heard a guy on the radio just the other day say that there's only one restriction for marriage. So ladies, guys, when you're looking for somebody, there's only one restriction. A believer. It's the only restriction that Scripture ever points, except someone of the opposite sex, of course. But as far as that's concerned, it's only that's the only other restriction. And he said, people that unequally yoke, that can ruin your spiritual relationship. It could even ruin your marriage. Two people are. So that was the only advice, and I don't think I had that advice. No one told me that. It just happened to work out. Well, I don't know what you think of it. I always like to do it because it is done, right? I'd like to give you something probably easier, and you'll have. Remember, the reading is due Friday, so I wouldn't mind if you could work on it a little bit tonight. We'll see. These are 3 poems that kind of go back to basics.
Every time you're in, you have to get this one.
You're like,
Yeah, I Or you just come to school and you just hear things. It doesn't need to be, it doesn't need to be.
Yeah, I would, but I'm afraid it would come out and be more of a novel.
Kind of.
I'm not sure I can keep it below 300 pages.
I would like you to do this, on your own. If you have a problem and need to ask somebody a question, I don't mind, guys, if you do that, but, otherwise, I'd like you to do it. First one is, William Blake. Notice the question, I think the questions are exactly the same, in each case. Who's speaking, who's the audience, what's the context, the dramatic context, means the setting, the occasion, the time and place, what's happening, what's actually going on. Then a couple of questions. We haven't talked so much about what motivates the speaker and tone. We have talked about that a lot. How does the language of the poem contribute to meaning, just like we just saw? How is the poem organized? I like to use the word structured. If it's a sonnet, and this doesn't look like a sonnet, but you already have your structure. Do the patterns of rhyme and rhythm contribute to the meaning and effect of the poem? We know about rhyme. Rhythm is something we're not going to spend as much time on, but you do need to hear the poem. What themes does the poem contain? And what was your personal response to the poem? I think all those questions, except for the last one, that last question was cut off. So the E. E. Cummings poem, number 10 is missing. I didn't want to put it on the back. So if you want to answer that also, you can. So you got, what, 15, 20 minutes, not quite, to start this process and do all three. Got it? To do all three of these. You may begin.